Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, we'll kind of look backwards and forwards. Next month, you'll mark your 61st birthday, and
don't remind me.
Well, at my age, I'm jealous. But Mr. Secretary, you're one of the most qualified secretaries during my tenure. You have spent a very long time learning history and being prepared to not repeat it. So I'm going to give you just a couple of names: Saigon, Tehran, Benghazi, Tripoli, and Kabul. Each one of those, to most people in the State Department, represent a failure to smoothly withdraw, a failure to anticipate, and the like. Now, the chairman had a fairly lengthy discussion with you about what the committee wants and needs in order to do its oversight. And in a very Kissinger-like way, you gave answers not to his questions, but answers that were the ones that you came here prepared to give. Mr. Secretary, I have with me, you'll recognize it, this is what your discovery looks like often. This is actual discovery from the State Department. I might suggest to you, after our mutual many years of doing this, that your best choice is accommodation when appropriate, compliance when a subpoena comes, which means that this sort of redaction cannot and shall not be accepted by Congress once a subpoena is issued. I might also suggest that if you deliver something under the cloak of being secret or top secret, that redaction is by definition inappropriate. That in fact, if we view in camera, redaction is inappropriate. If today you can make the commitment that when the accommodations to this and other committees, but particularly this committee, when the accommodation is that we receive information in some in-camera form, that it be delivered sooner, not later, and redacted only for actual claimed privileges. If you can make that commitment, I think the chairman can rest assured that we won't be getting what I sometimes call a black cow eating a licorice at midnight.
Thank you, Congressman. I appreciate that. What I can commit to is this. I can commit, as I have committed to the chairman, to find a way to make sure that this committee gets the information that it rightly needs to conduct its oversight. And I need to do that in a way that, of course, as I said in the case of the descent channel cable, protects the integrity of that process, but making sure that you get the information. More broadly, when it comes to documents, of course, we have national security considerations. There may be legal considerations, but I take the point that you're making. I want to make sure that you get the information.
And
that information,
Mr. Secretary, since you've sat behind the senators, and you've been on the other side, you're well aware that this co-equal body determines what it believes it needs to be seen. And with the exception of actual stated privileges, the court, if we have to go that far, makes it very clear that, in fact, we determine, not you, what our legislative needs and need to know is. So I might suggest that although that answer, again, in a very Kissinger-esque, I appreciate it.
I'll take that as a compliment.
It is. But please, put the other hat on that you wore when you sat on this side of the dais and recognize that the accommodation of sooner rather than later, in camera, if the chairman and the committee agree to it, allows us to then debate the smaller portion that might need to be made public or in some other way disseminated. I'd like to take an opportunity, because the world is listening, to speak past you for a moment, Mr. Secretary. The people who wrote the dissent cable are free to come to this committee, free to come to our staff, and free to come to the chairman as legitimate whistleblowers to be fully protected. And if they come forward and produce their names, then I submit to you that at that point, the statement you made here today is moot. That in fact, any member of the State Department who comes forward as a whistleblower on behalf of dissent of any sort leading up to the failed withdrawal from Kabul would be taken as a waiver of that history that we noted all the way back with the not late and in good health in New York, Henry Kissinger. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I thank you and yield back.
Gentleman yields. The chair now recognizes Mr. Cicilline.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being with us today, and I think we all owe you and the men and women of the State Department a great deal for the work that you do every single day, and I want to thank you personally for that. Over the past 2 years, the Biden administration has reestablished U.S. leadership on the global stage, deepening our strategic alliances and advancing our values and interests, and I really am grateful for Mr. Conley's recitation. I was sitting here listening to some of my Republican colleagues and wondering, did they miss the last 4 years? Did you, in fact, inherit an agreement by the prior administration to withdraw from Afghanistan by a date certain, and that also include the release of 5,000 Taliban fighters from prison?
That's correct.
Did you, in fact, inherit a decision from the prior administration to withdraw from the JCPOA that had kept Iran's nuclear program in check?
That is correct.
And you inherited a departure from the Paris Climate Accord.
That's right.
You also followed an administration that undermined the importance of NATO.
Well, that's a judgment.
The prior president, President Trump, made public statements about the obsolescence of NATO, correct?
I believe that's correct, yes.
And now they've proposed a budget that would decimate the development and diplomatic budget by up to 22%. Is that correct?
We've shared our concerns about proposed cuts to the budget proposal.
And I don't remember hearing from my Republican colleagues on this committee criticize any of those 5 events. And so it's rich to hear today this, as I think Mr. Conley said, lions and tigers and bears, oh my. So I want to ask you, Secretary Blinken, first with respect to the U.S. Obligations in multilateral organizations and peacekeeping entities. How do you assess the damage that is caused to U.S. credibility by our failing to stay current with our obligations? And if Congress were to grant the requested funds and authorities, how would the U.S. be able to change the dynamics in these institutions in our favor and in advancement of the national security interests of the United States?
Congressman, thank you for raising that. I think it's an important point because we find ourselves in a almost contorted ourselves in that we are by far the largest contributor to most of the programs in these organizations, and yet precisely because we find ourselves in some instances in arrears, our competitors, our adversaries point to that to say that we're actually not doing our part, we're not serious about those organizations. So it actually undermines our standing, it undermines our diplomacy. It's something we constantly have to correct, and I think that could be easily rectified by simply making sure that we're current with our obligations.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, earlier this week I traveled to the United Nations in New York to attend the second ever ARIA Formula meeting at the UN Security Council to focus on the specific vulnerabilities of LGBTQI plus persons. And particularly we heard about an increase in violence and anti-LGBTQI plus rhetoric and legislation throughout the continent of Africa. Can you just speak to what you are doing, what the embassies are doing in terms of staff and resources and coordination to confront these threats, and what Congress can do to help in that effort?
Thank you. This is a deep concern of ours. We've seen that marginalized groups, particularly the LGBTQI plus community in many countries, is under increased threat and increased siege. In fact, as I think you know, we put out just this week, and I put out personally, our annual human rights report, and one of the things that it documents is precisely that. So we're very much engaged around the world in a variety of ways in trying to make sure that we are advocating, encouraging, pressing countries to uphold the rights of all marginalized communities, including the LGBTQI plus community, and that they are, in the first instance, of course, protecting and defending those rights, and the second instance, not taking measures that would further undermine those rights. We do it in different ways in different places. We try to make sure that we're both sensitive to local considerations because we want to be as effective as we can be. So sometimes it's private, sometimes it's public, sometimes it's a combination of both, but our embassies are seized with this. And this really goes to, I think, a core tenet of view that I believe many Americans share, which is that all democracies are strengthened by protecting vulnerable populations, whatever they may be. We're equally engaged on pushing back against the persecution of religious minorities around the world. We see that, too, as a huge problem.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Finally, Turkey's use of its existing F-16 fleet to challenge Greek sovereignty and its refusal to rule out using upgraded F-16s to do so and continue to violate Greek territorial airspace undermines NATO unity, and I know that's an important priority for you. Would you speak to what steps the administration is taking to ensure that American weapons are not used to threaten allies and partners in Greece, Cyprus, and northern Syria?
Thank you, Congressman. The focus of our efforts, whether it's with Turkey, whether it's with Greece, whether it's with any other NATO ally, is to make sure that they have the equipment and technology that they need to be fully interoperable with NATO, to make sure that they can do everything that they need to do as a NATO ally, while at the same time, of course, ensuring that to the extent there are any disputes between them, that any equipment or technology we provide is not used in furtherance of those differences or those disputes. So that's certainly the case. We believe that Turkey should get the upgraded F-16s and the modernization package for their existing F-16s. We think it's important to NATO, important to the alliance. At the same time, we are working assiduously to try and ensure that any tensions that exist between NATO allies, in this case Greece and Turkey, are abated and end, and that they do not engage in either actions or rhetoric that would inflame the situation. So I was just in both Turkey and Greece. Of course, Turkey had the devastating, mind-boggling earthquake. Shortly after I was in Greece, we had the horrific train accident. Our hearts and our hands actually are going to try to help both countries in both situations. But at the same time, we want to make sure that
Gentleman's time has
tensions
expired.
in the Eastern Mediterranean.
Chair now recognizes the Vice
Thank
Chair
you,
of the
Mr.
full
Secretary.
committee, Ms. Wagner.
Thank you.
I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank you, Secretary Blinken, for your service and your time today. Mr. Secretary, yesterday the House passed the Taiwan Assurance Implementation Act. This is my bipartisan legislation I worked on with Mr. Connolly and others that requires the State Department to provide robust reporting on engagement with Taiwan and ask that the U.S. remove self-imposed barriers to engagement. I am urging my colleagues in the Senate to take up my legislation and send it to the President's desk so we can work towards tangible and sustained progress in the U.S.-Taiwan relationship. The United States must demonstrate resolute and unflinching support for this important democratic partner as it faces increased bullying and coercion by the People's Republic of China. In the meantime, I hope that you will help us understand how the State Department's budget will move this critical partnership in the right direction, because I am worried, frankly, that State's current approach is overly concerned with avoiding even the slightest chance of offending Beijing. Mr. Secretary, I hope that we can all agree that our confrontation with China represents a generational challenge for the United States and its partners. However, I was concerned to see so little priority given to U.S. arms sales and other security assistance programs in the Indo-Pacific. If the Indo-Pacific is the decisive theater, why is foreign military financing for East Asia and the Pacific third in priority, with only 2% of the proposed funding going towards the region, sir?
First of all, thank you. I appreciate your focus on this. I look forward to reading what you've put forward. Let me mention just quickly, by the way, that at the beginning of this administration, we liberalized our contact guidance when it comes to our engagement with Taiwan, precisely to make sure that U.S. engagement with Taiwan better reflects the broadening, deepening unofficial relations that we have. And that guidance has been out for nearly 2 years. When it comes to the foreign military financing, sales, et cetera, just to focus on Taiwan for a second, then we can broaden out. I have signed more of these agreements than any previous Secretary of State. And in the last couple of years, we have provided for an additional $5 billion in defense-related sales to Taiwan. This builds on a long record going back over many
But yet
administrations.
that foreign aid and the weapon are not making it to Taiwan.
Well, there you have an important point. And the challenge that we're facing across the board lies not with my department, even as we work to streamline everything that we're doing. And as I said, I signed out more of these than any previous secretary. We have real production challenges across the board. Production challenges that have built up over many years as various lines have gone dormant, COVID, supply chain problems. All of these things have come to a head. That's exactly what the Defense Department, industry are working on right now. And my anticipation is you're going to see significant progress on that. But it's not for want of trying to make sure that all of our partners.
But time is of the essence, Mr. Secretary. It truly is. And the situation and the confrontation that could occur between China and Taiwan and our other partners is before us. In the most recent National Defense Authorization Act, Congress authorized up to $2 billion in this foreign military funding grants to Taiwan for each of fiscal years 2023 through 2027, which would allow the United States and Taiwan to engage in joint long-term planning for the acquisition, deployment, and sustainment of critical capabilities. Why is Taiwan not a priority ask funding or attention in FMF?
Taiwan is a priority, and as you know, we have many different ways of doing this. So we appreciate the authority. We put together in the budget a new fund to look at emerging priorities for FMF. Taiwan would be included in that. At the same time, in the case of Taiwan, the most effective way to date to make sure that they have what they need to defend themselves has been through the Foreign Military Sales Program. They increased their defense budget by 11%. They have the capabilities, the capacity to make the acquisitions they need. And at the same time, we've been working very closely with them in terms of the advice that we're providing to make sure that they have an effective deterrent and defense capacity. Sometimes that goes to significant weapon systems. Sometimes that goes to very different things that may not be the most expensive or flashiest.
And I think that, thank you for that. And I do have some additional questions that I will submit for the record, but I do submit to you our very bipartisan Taiwan Assurance Implementation Act that was passed the House last night. I hope that the State Department, under your leadership, will take a very clear look at this. It is important as we move forward and with the threat of China. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence, and I yield back.
Thank you, Vice Chair Wagner. The chair now recognizes Mr. Barra.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to first acknowledge and thank Ms. Shamblin for being here. I know your family's from Roseville, which is approximate to my district in Sacramento County. And from what I've learned about Nicole, she loved being a Marine. She loved serving our country. She loved serving humanity. And you know, when I think about what I love about the United States of America is I don't think about this as a Democrat or a Republican. I think about what our values are, values of freedom, of democracy, the obligations that we have in terms of global security and protecting those values around the world. So, Mr. Secretary, I want to applaud you and the administration in these first 2 years. You acknowledge that the world has changed. I mean, there are new threats out there, and you know, I applaud the coalition building that the administration's done, keeping a coalition together and protecting and preserving the freedom of the Ukrainian people and the country there. I also want to applaud the trilateral alliance with Japan and Korea, which is at a very different place today than when you came into office, elevating the Quad coalition. And in this 21st century security architecture, it will take coalitions of like-valued countries that really do share those values, values that Nicole held dearly, and the best way to serve her memory is to continue to preserve these American values. You're here to talk about the budget, and you know, obviously an area that I spend a lot of time on is the competition in the Indo-Pacific. I appreciate the budget that you put forth in our competition with the People's Republic of China. In the proposal, there's $400 million in discretionary funding in the Counter PRC Influence Fund, but there's also over $11 billion of mandatory funding that is part of our effort to outcompete China. It's often, it's unusual to see a mandatory request in there, and I think what staff informs me is we'll have to, as a committee, put forth authorizing legislation. But I'd like to give you a chance to talk about why the mandatory funding is so important to our efforts to outcompete China.
Thank you. I very much appreciate that. And I think it reflects what I'm hearing from many members of this committee, Democrats and Republicans alike, which is a recognition that when it comes to China, this is a generational challenge for us. And in our judgment, discretionary funding alone will not help us get the job done in terms of outcompeting China, where we are in intense competition. We are providing in the budget and the plan that goes along with it new and innovative ways to try to provide viable alternatives at scale that discretionary funding alone can't meet. And when I say viable alternatives, I mean things that countries around the world, potential partners, existing partners, need and are looking for, and that the United States hopefully can help provide. We've got long-term projects that need funding upfront to cover longer periods than discretionary funding allows, and the predictability and the insulation from annual fluctuations for this discrete set of programs we think would be incredibly valuable. It's a little bit modeled on what we see as the success of the CHIPS and Science Act, where the State Department was given money over 5 years to work with other countries to secure semiconductor supply chains, downstream all the way, and upstream, as well as to try to make sure that countries that were developing information communications technology were doing so in secure ways with trusted vendors so that those networks were safe and secure. That's a good model, and it's replicated more broadly in this budget request.
Well, I think it's a model that sends a signal to not only the people PRC, but to the countries in the region. You know, certainly the $7.1 billion for the COFA countries sends a strong signal to the Pacific Islands that America's there. We're committed. We're going to be there for the long haul, and we have their back. And I you know, again, this committee will have to work on authorizing language. I would hope that language reflects the concern with China, and that we can do that and work with the administration to make sure that that funding is there. You know, just in the brief time I have left, can you talk about the importance and of the trilateral relationship that you know, and the place where, you know, I applaud President Yoon for, you know, his leadership, as well as Prime Minister Kishida.
Yeah, I share that view, and I think for us to make sure that our two closest allies and partners in the region, Japan and Korea, not only are strengthening their relationships and partnerships with us, but are doing so between themselves and among the three of us trilaterally, further enhances not only our security, but our ability to get lots of things done around the world. We bring to bear the strengths of our three countries, of course, dealing with challenges posed by China, North Korea, but again, in so many other areas, including the provision of humanitarian assistance, including having safe and secure maritime domains, working in outer space together. There are a multiplicity of things that we're doing through this trilateral coordination. President Biden brought the two leaders together.
Gentleman's time has expired.
We're doing that at every level.
I now recognize myself.